All right, we still don't have a good name for the Monday edition of the Morning Pit or the Tuesday edition of the Morning Pit, when we go back and, recap the things that Pat Narduzzi said. We had some good suggestions, actually, something about after looking at the tape or, Pat and our Tuesday or something like that. The Morning Pat, somebody suggested. I like those. We'll keep workshopping a few of those. But today we've got our big one. It's the 5 big questions. Dum, dum, dum. 5 big questions for Pitt heading into this week's game at Florida State. Whatsoever could we be asking about ahead of this huge matchup against the Seminoles? A real chance for Pitt to build on the momentum they established last week and potentially build it into something that could get pretty interesting. We won't get too far on the hyperbole of what is sort of at stake for Pitt this weekend, although maybe we'll talk about that tomorrow and maybe even tonight on the live show. But for now, we got 5 big questions for Pitt. Some of the biggest questions, what I think are the biggest questions facing the Panthers heading into this week's game in Tallahassee. Let's jump into it here on the Wednesday edition of the Morning Pit on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Yeah, it's Wednesday here on the Morning Pit, youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, counting down the days to Saturday. I got to think Pitt fans are probably pretty fired up for Saturday, or at least, well, I don't know if Pitt fans actually get fired up. I think Pitt fans get nervous. When there's more pressure, when there's more opportunity to actually accomplish something, Pitt fans get more and more nervous. And you know what? They're not alone in that regard. I think sometimes there have been Pitt coaches who are a lot looser when things are going bad. Pitt fans, I think, feel in their natural habitat when they can be depressed about Pitt football, and right now they've got a glimmer of hope, which in some ways makes them feel even worse about it because they, a glimmer of hope can always be snatched away with a crushing defeat. And so Pitt fans probably don't know how to feel, but they should be excited because there's a game that actually feels like it might matter on Saturday when Pitt goes to Florida State to take on the Seminoles at noon in Tallahassee. Obviously, we're getting ready for that game. We'll look at things. We'll look at some Florida State things tomorrow, probably. We'll be kind of touching on different ones throughout the week. But today, we got 5 big questions for Pitt. What are the 5 biggest questions facing the Panthers heading into this game? And, I mean, first one's obvious, right? Like, I don't think there's any... I mean, I don't think I need to, like, mess around too long or, take too long trying to, diving into it or find a clever way to say it. I think it's obvious. Can Trey Bukowski continue with his strong kicking? He's made 7 field goals in a row since he missed that one at West Virginia. He made 3 in a row prior to that, missed the one at West Virginia. He's made 3 in a row since then, 7 in a row since then, including a career-long 47. I mean, Trey Bukowski is kicking really well right now, and it's probably the biggest question facing Pitt heading into this game at Florida State is, can Trey Bukowski keep kicking well? I'm not going to stop making Trey Bukowski, Mason Heintschel switch-ups like we did with the shot of the game on Saturday, but obviously the biggest question is Mason Heintschel. Can he continue what he did with that performance against Boston College, going against a much tougher opponent, going against, into a road environment, presumably a difficult road environment? How can he do? And I think one of the questions kind of inherent, and we've talked about this throughout the week. We've written about it. I'll probably write more about it in the 3-2-1 column on Friday. One of the questions is like, okay, Mason Heintschel came out and had this great game, 323 yards, 4 touchdowns, no interceptions, ran well, completed 30 of 41 or something like that. That's probably 75%. Had this really outstanding debut as Pitt's starting quarterback, but he did it against Boston College, who isn't very good. They don't look very good. They weren't very good, and that has to be considered. He didn't go out there against Ohio State in week 1, in his debut and get a win like that. And so you have to take that into consideration. But I think there are a few ways to look at it. Number one, and this is the simplest and most important one, is like, it's better to have done it like he did than to not do that against Boston College, right? If he came out and was like, 18 of 36 for 203 yards, 2 touchdowns and a pick, but they still won, you'd be like, okay, well, at least they got the win, but it's not like he looked all that great. Like, a good quarterback should be able to take advantage of an inferior opponent, right? It doesn't necessarily mean they're a great quarterback. It just means they're good enough to take advantage of an inferior opponent, but not all good quarterbacks are able to do that. And so I don't go too far down the road of, well, it was only Boston College. I do think there are some interesting numbers when you kind of compare what Holstein, God, I got to stop doing that, what Heintschel faced against Boston College and how Boston College has done so far this season. When Heintschel was pressured on 26% of his dropbacks against Boston College, and Boston College blitzed him 32% of the time. That's actually a low blitz rate, according to Pro Football Focus. That's a low blitz rate for BC this year. In their other games against Power 4 competition, they played Michigan State, Stanford, and Cal. They blitzed 51.4%, 62.5%, and 60%, respectively, as opposed to 32% against Pitt. They also got more pressure against Michigan State and Stanford than they got against Pitt. They got less pressure against Cal than they got against Pitt. But what's interesting is, Aiden Childs at Michigan State was pressured on 40% of his dropbacks. Bengal Branson at Stanford was pressured on 38% of his dropbacks. JKS, the Cal quarterback, whose name I'm not going to butcher, was pressured on about 23% of his dropbacks. What's notable to me, for a few reasons, is that none of those guys dropped back as many times as Mason Heintschel did. Mason Heintschel dropped back like 50 times. You know what I mean? Between the 41 passes and a couple sacks and some scrambles, he dropped back 50 times, according to Pro Football Focus. None of those other Power 4 quarterbacks, Childs or Gulbranson or JKS, dropped back more than 35 times. And so Heintschel did more. He dropped back more, and he was pressured less than the rest of those guys, or a lower percentage than 2 out of those 3 guys. And this ties into actually to question number 2 when we talk about how Mason Heintschel will do in his second start, how he'll respond to a bigger challenge, and how he'll play. Tied into that is a question of, can Pitt's offensive line protect him? We would assume, and I think rightfully so, that Florida State is going to have a better pass rush or better defensive line than Boston College had. That's going to create a bigger challenge for Pitt's offensive line and, by extension, Mason Heintschel. And so the question of Mason Heintschel and how he does in his second career start playing a superior opponent on the road is inextricably tied to question number 2, which is, can the offensive line protect Mason Heintschel? And when you look at some comparison points here for Florida State with their pressure packages, Ty Simpson, Alabama, that win that Florida State got in the opening week of the season, the biggest win, the one that sort of cemented everyone's beliefs that Florida State was really all that. They pressured Ty Simpson 37% of the time. They blitzed around 37% of the time, and it worked pretty well. And they got more pressure on Ty Simpson, the Alabama quarterback, than Wisconsin, Georgia, or Vanderbilt did, the other Power 4 opponents that Alabama played. And so Florida State has done the best job getting pressure on Ty Simpson that you've seen from an Alabama opponent this season. Chandler Morris, that game where they lost to Virginia, he got pressured about 36.5% of the time. Florida State also blitzed almost 50% of the time. And so there was a lot of, a decent amount of pressure there, more pressure, a higher percentage of pressure than Mason Heintschel saw against Boston College. Now, Carson Beck at Miami was only pressured on 20% of his dropbacks by Florida State. And they blitzed about 30% of the time. Now, Beck was 0-4 when he faced pressure, but they only got there 20% of the time on Beck's dropbacks, which is interesting, which probably says something about Miami's pass protection. So you ask a question like, well, is Pitt's pass protection going to be closer to Virginia's or Miami's? Where Virginia gave up pressure on 36.5% of the dropbacks and Miami gave up 20% of the dropbacks. My guess is Pitt's pass protection is going to be a little bit closer to Virginia, which means Mason Heintschel is going to be under pressure more. But maybe this ties back into something that what I said right off the bat of are you excited about this game? Obviously the best case scenario would be for Pitt's offensive line to keep all the pressure away from Heintschel and give him a clean pocket the whole game and never, not let him get under pressure at all or anything like that. But I'm interested to see how he handles it. If there is a little more pressure, if there's a higher percentage of pressure dropbacks, how does he handle that? Because I thought he looked pretty good. Not great. I think he had a lot of those sort of spin moves out of the pocket where you're taking your eyes off of downfield, but he can run well. And I think he can run well to keep plays alive and find passes downfield, and he can run well to scramble for first downs. I think that is a skill, a talent he's had. It's something he's had since high school. And I think he is, I'm interested to see how that looks. Now, he might be under pressure so much that like it's just difficult to get anything going, but he looked pretty crafty against Boston College, and he was a crafty player in high school where he was his team's best player and led them to a district championship for the first time in 42 years, mostly just based on him being a playmaker. And this is the kind of game where you can show if you really have those intangibles, So I'm interested to see how he does with that. Florida State probably going to get more pressure on him than Boston College did. Although Boston College, kind of like I was saying with the Michigan State and Stanford games, hasn't been terrible at getting pressure. And Pitt did better against Boston College's pass rush than Michigan State and Stanford did. Next question. Availability on offense. Desmond Reed. Jeff Percy. There's a couple key guys we're going to be keeping an eye on here. Keith Gouveia, we know, is out for the season. Ryan Coretta's in as the starting left guard, but Jeff Percy left the Boston College game. Pitt's starting left tackle came out after their first touchdown, didn't play the rest of the game. Kendall Stanley came in, and I think he did fine. Obviously, you'd like to have your starting offensive lineman out there. I don't know what Percy's availability is going to be. I don't know what Desmond Reed's availability is going to be. He hasn't played since the West Virginia game. Missed the last two. Excuse me. I don't know. I don't know what to expect there. I'm guessing we won't see Desmond Reed, but I don't know what to expect there. What's interesting to me is that Pitt's running backs looked pretty good. Some of it was the blocking, and some of it was those guys making plays. I think Juelz Goff and Jagirian Turner both, they can do stuff. They can do stuff. And that sounds like a dumb thing to say, but you watched it, right? You saw them do things. You saw them make plays. You saw them get 186 yards of total offense between the two of them, whether they're rushing or receiving. Those guys made plays. And I think it's not quite a thunder and lightning deal with Goff and Turner, but there are some elements of there where Goff is able to sort of keep his legs churning and move the pile a little bit, and Turner is able to get on the edge, use his speed. Now, using your speed against Boston College on the edge is going to be a little bit different than using your speed against Florida State on the edge, where presumably they'll have more team speed and certainly more speed on defense. But I think those guys are capable. And so, look, you want Desmond Reed back out there as soon as you can get him. But if you're looking at the big picture of the season, if Reed needs another week before he can be 100% healthy and out of the woods or out of the shadow of potentially re-injuring it, I say you take that time, because I think Goff and Turner looked good enough to hold up. Now, if you can get Reed out there, you probably should do it. Availability on the other side. This is the fourth big question for Pitt this week. There are some big questions, I think, in terms of defensive availability. And one is Cruz Brookins, who left the game, I think, in the first quarter or first half, somewhere around there. Looked like he landed awkwardly on his shoulder, did not play again. And then, obviously, there are the questions about the defensive ends, with Blaine Spires and Zach Crothers missing this last game after they got hurt against Louisville. Isaiah Neal, who you see right there, having to move outside to defensive end, formerly a defensive tackle. You need to get some of these guys back. I don't know when Jaden Moore is going to be available. I don't know how long Zach Crothers is going to be out. It feels like Spires should be the next guy who can get back in there. You got to build that depth back up, because I think if you go down to Florida State and you're going with Jimmy Scott, Nate Temple, Joey Zielinski, and a converted defensive tackle, who I thought did well playing defensive end, but he's still a converted defensive tackle, that's going to make things really challenging. I think it's going to be far more challenging than if you had another one of these guys like Spires, like Crothers, or, God willing, you get Jaden Moore back at some point. It's going to be a lot more challenging. And that ties into our next big question, our fifth big question, which is defending Florida State. How, what are the challenges in defending Florida State? We talked about it yesterday with that cast of character, the supporting cast that Tommy Castellanos has. A bunch of four-star guys, a bunch of speed, a bunch of good athletes. Deuce Robinson, the big receiver, I think leads the ACC in contested catches according to Pro Football Focus. Tommy Castellanos has thrown, I think, 5 interceptions this season, which is tied for the third most, but he also, makes plays. He scrambles. I think he leads the ACC in scramble yards according to Pro Football Focus. pretty much minimized the sacks. I think Florida State's only given up 6 sacks all season, and I think probably a lot of that is due to Castellanos getting out and running. Kind of like we said after the Duquesne game and the Central Michigan game for Pitt that, they only gave up 1 sack in each game. Well, is that good pass protection, or is that Eli Holstein keeping plays alive? And I think it was more the latter than the former. And this week, I'm guessing if Pitt minimizes the sacks against Florida State, it's going to be because Mason Heintschel's out there and running. Tommy Castellanos is doing a lot of that as well. So you got to find a way to contain him, partially to get sacks, also partially not to let him get out and get big gains scrambling. The outside linebackers are going to be tested. They're going to be put into conflict, as they say. Rasheem Biles and Kyle Lewis. Those guys are going to need to have a huge game on Saturday. And obviously, if you could have Cruz Brookins back for this one, that would be significant as well. But it's going to be a big challenge. I could see this being a game that stays pretty close. I mean, I think I could see, I don't know. There's a lot of ways it could go, actually. I'm not going to sit here and make a prediction because I don't know. There are too many unknowns with Pitt right now, like a true freshman quarterback, the injuries on both sides of the ball. And you know what? I think there's some uncertainty about Florida State as well. They got that big win over Alabama, but, what have they done since then to sort of convince you that they're as good as they looked when they beat Alabama? Because it doesn't necessarily feel like they're trending in the right direction. Obviously, losing 2 in a row coming into Saturday, that's not trending in the right direction. But you look at what they've done. They beat Alabama, and then they beat 2 tomato cans and then lost to 2 ACC teams. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that we know who Alabama is right now, other than they're a 3-2 team, or Alabama. I'm not sure we know who Florida State is right now, other than they're a 3-2 team, which is what Pitt is. Although Pitt is ahead in the ACC standings because they're 1-1, as opposed to Alabama. Why do I keep doing that? As opposed to Florida State being 0-2. So Florida State kind of has something to prove here too. Looking to break a 2-game losing streak, taking on a team that at least won a game. Both of these teams, I think, will know a lot more about themselves when they come out of this and go into, going into their next week's games. And for Florida State, that is at Stanford, and for Pitt, that's at Syracuse. So Saturday at noon is going to be a big one for both of these teams, Pitt and Florida State. And I'm curious. I'm curious about it. I wonder, are you curious about this as well? Are you excited about this, or are you kind of nervous? All right. Well, lots of questions for you, the fans. Certainly a lot of questions for Pitt to answer, and we'll get those answers soon enough. In the meantime, we'll have a conversation tonight about it. Me and Jim will be joining you on the live Panther-Lair show this evening at 8:30 p.m. right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com, so make sure you tune in for that. And if you want to make sure you don't miss any of our live streams or Morning Pitt videos or post-game shows or anything like that, you can subscribe to youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com. Turn on your notifications, get an alert sent to your phone, and you will never miss any of our Pitt video content. All right, make sure you like and subscribe. Have a good Wednesday. We'll talk to you tonight on the live stream. We'll catch up with you tomorrow on the Morning Pitt right here on youtube.com/Panther-Lair.com.